Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be reviewing a new book about a photographer that I have to admit I knew very little about. Although he created thousands of images over a career lasting almost 80 years, I wonder how many of you watching will be familiar with his work. I did recognise a few of the images in the book when I started looking through it, but I'm not sure I could have put his name to them if I'd seen them elsewhere. Well, this book brings to the forefront and celebrates the life of a photographer that we should all know about, Louis Stettner. And I have to say the publishers have done a great job. It's a wonderful book. So let's take a look. This hardback book contains 190 photographs over 344 pages. The printing, design and paper quality are what you would expect from such a publication, and no expense has been spared in its production. There are 4 in-depth essays at the front of the book, covering topics such as Louis Stettner's photographic vision, his political and social beliefs, and his influences and the details of his personal life. Louis Stettner was born in 1922 in Brooklyn, New York, one of 4 children and an identical twin. He was given a box camera as a young teenager and just started taking pictures. He quickly formed an attachment to the streets of his native city and soon realised that taking pictures could become a way of life. He served as a combat photographer in World War II. He was stationed in New Guinea, the Philippines and later Japan, the war having a profound effect on him. Throughout his career he moved between New York and Paris, arriving in Paris in 1947, intending to stay only a few weeks, but remain there for 5 years, before later settling there in the 1990s until his death in 2016. His early pictures received praise from the novelist Henry Miller and also from Brassai, who wrote an introduction to his first portfolio. Stettner wrote a monthly column for the New York-based Camera 35 magazine that ran throughout the 1970s. And in his column he wrote about the history of photography and the understanding of it as an art form. Although his work remained thematically consistent, he did not really receive the recognition he deserved, because he was never a follower of a rigid style. Stettner studied photography at the Photo League in New York, a cooperative of photographers who banded together around a range of common social and creative causes. The book is organised chronologically and charts his work from the early days in New York and Paris, and crucially includes his much later colour work, as well as his landscapes of rural France. Now, I chose to use a colour image for the thumbnail of this video, even though the bulk of his work was shot in black and white. And the reason I did that is because I was so impressed that he was still capturing amazing images really that late into his career, when he was in his 80s. The early pictures from New York feature the Subway series, which is a great example of a dedication to a cause, if you like, finding a subject or a theme and fully exploring it until you feel that you've told your story. Too many photographers I see today seem to pick up a project and put it down without actually fully exploring it, without giving it the time to actually become something worthwhile. The Subway series shows Stettner's fascination with everyday life, depicting ordinary New Yorkers on their daily commute. This satisfied his need to express his interests relating to the social classes and how they coexist. Things like trains tend to be great levers when it comes to illustrating this. Using a Rolleiflex, he kept his camera in plain sight, unlike the system adopted by Walker Evans some years earlier, who kept his hidden inside his overcoat. After the war in 1947, Stettner travelled to Paris and began to photograph the city only recently liberated from the Nazis. And look at these images of deserted streets, almost fully devoid of the human presence. Stettner often used a 10x8 view camera, particularly during the early part of the day. There is an eeriness and a melancholy to these pictures, which depict the aftermath of the horrors of war and its devastating effect on a city and its people. Gone are the days of the vibrant and lively metropolis, to be replaced by a city that seems to have lost its soul. The second set of images come from his time spent in Spain, Europe, and then his return to the USA. While Stettner was a Marxist politically, he was a humanist by nature, and his work celebrates real people. And it's this humanity that dominates much of his photography, seeing the workers as individuals rather than cogs in the machine. Among his influences were Rembrandt, Cartier-Bresson, and many figures from literature such as Walt Whitman, Dostoevsky and Balzac. Here we see pictures that are removed from his usual hunting ground of urban spaces and feature more natural settings. These pages show his skill at capturing the more human side of his subjects, such as fishermen, people at work, children playing, and families during their leisure hours at the beach. I love the contrast between these images and his more urban work. There is a lightness to them, and they feel like a relief for both him and the people he chose to photograph. My favourite part of the book is the section devoted to his New York pictures from the 1950s and 60s. He returns to the transport system, but this time chooses to focus on Penn Station and commuters on the outside of trains. These feel more voyeuristic in nature, as we peer into more intimate spaces. These are private and quiet moments of solitude and reflection. One of the great things about photographing in the urban environment is that you do come across these personal moments where, although we are in the most public of places, you can find intimacy and emotion of the most private kind. It's up to the viewer to decide what the story might be. I love his composition and framing techniques that help to bring this out. One of the things I strive to do myself when photographing the city is to use tricks such as subframing and the shapes created by the light and shade to help sort of confine my subjects within the environment and their surroundings. Using the city as a sort of prop can help to convey a message. This section also features pictures of a Greenwich Village beatnik called Nancy, whom he accompanied as she moved around the city. Following this period, we move into the 70s, and the pictures highlight the city's workers, demonstrations, and the spirit of the city. Stettner was a lifelong Marxist and very politically motivated. He objected to the Vietnam War and became a supporter of the Black Panther movement. During this decade, his photographs feature factory workers and the industrial environment, but also the strength of the individual and humanity itself. There is a real beauty in these images that celebrates the ordinary human being, the common people. For me, one of the things that really makes the book are the later pictures from the 2000s. I absolutely love them, and they are quite a surprise after the strong monochromatic style that he used through most of his career. Stettner began to experiment with colour in the 1990s, but the images shown here are from much later, starting from around 2004. With the colour, we have the continuation of the strong contrasty look, but this time with deep saturated colours that look as though they are wet to the touch. They drip with colour. Again, we have the isolated figures and solitary subjects lost within the city streets. A sense of loneliness and isolation, something I've tried to convey in my own work, seems to separate these figures from the hustle and bustle around them. There is a silence within the ever-present noise of the big city. The last chapter is devoted to Stettner's pictures from Provence in France. By this time he's in his 90s and looking for a more relaxed place to photograph. He made these pictures using a large format camera, and they are a complete contrast to the rest of the book, but are well worth the inclusion as they show another side to the photographer and his skill at using the light and shade in a rural setting. And for Louis Stettner, a quiet time at the end of his career for reflection. Louis Stettner liked to say of himself that he was the world's best known unknown photographer. Well, it's a beautiful book, and it certainly established Louis Stettner in my mind as one of the great photographers from some of the most important years in the history of photography. A portfolio like this is long overdue, and I think it's sure to introduce the work to many lovers of street photography and the urban environment, who will be inspired and influenced by Stettner's story and his wonderful work. Thanks for watching. Check out the link to the book in the description to the video, and I'll see you next time.